No, so Frost and Sullivan didn't split out that number. I think that you're right, there is an awful lot of people in London who don't own a car already, but as I walk down the streets of inner London and outer London, and we showed it in the video, they are still crammed with cars on either side. So that's the opportunity to persuade those people who are currently holding on to that car for that odd time they need it to part with it. So I think if we can do that, thank you very much, then the opportunity to change the way our city looks and do much, much better things with that space is really, really significant. So I think, yeah, totally acknowledge that there are plenty of people who aren't car owners at the moment. We see the opportunity to persuade even more people out of cars. That's what we're fighting for. I hope that by 2020, whether it's 1 million members or otherwise, I hope that the penny has truly dropped, that we have to embrace car sharing as a really positive solution for London. So at the moment, we've come a great deal since we launched here in 2004. You know, we have 150,000 members, that's okay. But still, despite that progress, the opportunity that's still out there is huge. We think that Flex is the opportunity to take car sharing to the next level. But we know that we need to persuade boroughs who still need to be convinced that this form of car sharing is positive. And that's exactly the same as we had to do back in 2004, when we had to convince people that round-trip car sharing was something that was positive for the city. And I think broadly that case has now been made. We have to do exactly the same again. So I hope that by 20, that case is just seen as obvious and done, and that car sharing is properly being adopted as a mainstream solution for Londoners.
Yeah, and just to kind of contextualise further the Zipcar thing, the Deputy Mayor's quote, as I said at the time, Deputy Mayors can say things and then the policy isn't necessarily going to follow rapidly by 2020. But what I liked about it was a politician trying to lead and shape the debate, and I think too often we've got into a problematic area where local and central government are in this very reactive mode, as if it's sort of the will of the people and then we'll react around it, as opposed to trying to start debate and shape conversation, and then in a deliberative democracy we'd get to something that would resemble a policy. I suppose the interesting thing he's saying is that we need to think about 2030 by 2020. You know, we have these issues to deal with, and I really like what Jonathan was saying about, and yet we have the issue now. You know, we have the issue now around air quality and congestion and accidents and all of those things. And most of my work, to be clear, is on projects right now. I was sort of asked to speak in a future-y sort of mode in a way, and happy to do so. But pragmatically, car sharing is incredibly important as a movement, alongside things like autonomous as they come into view, alongside cycling and walking, and I'm interested in all of those things.
How it works sort of holistically. Yeah.
Absolutely, and the key thing there is about this sense of shared infrastructure. Yeah. And right now, car sharing is a very good way to do that. In future, there will be other ways of sharing things as well.
So Pat, just a thought for you. You've been involved in these seismic shifts, and maybe you've got a thought about how we can encourage policy to follow on.
On that point, I think it's an issue about time. We lack ambition when it comes to time, and I think what we're talking about today is ambition to do things differently. Yeah. And we said, well, everything that we've heard about today has been based on somebody's ambition. And sometimes we look at horizons which are so far, they're unbelievable. Like the Mayor's transport strategy has got some great things in, but is it really going to change people's mindsets when they're looking at behaviour change in 2041? You know, if you actually now have, you know, a sense of urgency, and even if you don't get to 1 million in 2020, you might get to 800,000 or something like that, and it's shooting for something. And I think what came across from the various presentations, and Dan's especially, and it's something that I could have spent, as you say, the whole day unpacking what I said in 15 minutes, is how we take risks and trial things and do it. And that's one of the things why I work in New York, and New York have actually done that through things like the Times Square experiment, where they proved that it actually saved lives, reduced air pollution, and actually the economy was improved as well. There's a great thing on Twitter at the moment where a woman has actually taken over a car parking space and she's just put grass on it and invited people to come and sit there and talk to people. You know, your point about different methods of consultation. And I go back to ambition and how we help people feel ambitious about their own space. In my street, I live in Bermondsey and we suffer from, we're the only central parking area just outside the congestion zone, which doesn't have a CPZ, and we use for commuter car parking. So the solution for most people is to give a controlled zone, and nobody wants to. Very few people want to actually look at what else we use that space for. You know, they're just simply, how do I make sure I can park outside number 24 where I live? 24 Almagrove or 22 Balaclava Road is my space, and I think we all need to work harder at inspiring people to want that behaviour change, and it does happen in places. One of the things, and it's something I wanted to raise in this discussion, and it was very evident in your promotional video, is we need to be careful about not talking to the PLUs. You know, we're talking to the people like us in all of these things, and if you're talking about flexible working because you're an office bit worker, and a whole plethora of things, which doesn't relate to a cleaner who takes 2 buses back to Bromley by Bow because they can't afford the tube. You know, we have to think about society in a multi-flexible way.
Yeah.
So the electric point, yes, absolutely. We want this fleet to be electric. We think it makes sense to be so. The Flex fleet is for short trips around inner London. So clearly that is going to be the most applicable for electric vehicles. And we're talking to car manufacturers around how we can do that. There is a reality that we need infrastructure to allow us to make that change. So London's electric vehicle infrastructure is still very, very poor indeed. So we're absolutely committed to making that change, and it won't be far away. I think we'll start to make that movement next year, but we do need the infrastructure to support it. In terms of negative modal shift, I think you've just got to look at the evidence, and I think there is now a growing amount of evidence out there that suggests that negative modal shift isn't happening, and the last 2 years worth of Car Plus research into one-way car sharing both times has suggested pretty much the same things, reassuringly, which is there is a net reduction in miles driven, around 700 miles per person per year. So say the evidence is showing that people aren't jumping into cars that previously would have been on bikes or walking. So I think, and actually Greg Archer, the director of an NGO, Transport and Environment, wrote an article last week saying concerns about negative modal shift aren't based in evidence. And funnily enough, I would agree with him. But I think the one thing I would say is in the same way that we were committed to making the case for round trip many years ago, same remains for flexible today. You know, we have to persuade boroughs in London that this service is good for London. So we will be as open book as we can around the data that it shows and make sure that everyone is convinced that there aren't unintended consequences and that it is delivering towards London's objectives.
Yeah. Dan, I notice you're nodding there. Pat, anything to add?
Just briefly, you know, I completely agree about sort of the transport deserts and serving those. But also, you know, from your point, from what Jonathan's just said, I think if we can actually get more people out of not using their cars, you know, a little bit of sort of what's the word? I don't know how to put it, but you know, if we encourage a tiny percentage of people to use cars when they wouldn't, but a huge number of people to use cars to not use cars who are already doing so, then that's the behaviour change we need to create. And one of the things I think we've got to really take on board here is we all lead complex lives. And I think this is about choice, and everything I think we are responsible for in city, thinking about cities, is assisting that choice. If you make choices easy, people change behaviour.
Yeah.
You avoid backlash by making other options smarter better options. So you're not. So the way that I see it is the way to persuade people out of those private cars that do give you a backlash whenever you try and take a parking space away, is to give them other options that they can feel that they can use that are going to be better. There is a reality that people have car needs in London. A really significant amount of people do. So we as a city have a decision to make as to how do we want to provide for those. Some of those needs are longer round trip ones. Some of them are for A to B trips. And there are trips which will be better done by public transport, and there will be trips that will be better done by the car. And you have to give people options on how they do it, whether it be because actually public transport doesn't serve that route. London is very good for in and out trips, but if you've tried to go around London, it's actually really difficult. If you're going to pick up bits of furniture, there are times where actually a car is going to make sense. And we as a city have to be pragmatic about it and think, what is the best way of providing for it? If we can do that, then you won't have the backlash from your residents every time you try and do something else with part of the streetscape. I don't see the way that people use Zipcar Flex as the same way they use the bike hire scheme. I think the bike hire scheme is very good for you commute into one point, you take bike hire onwards, and so that's why you see Waterloo Station as it is. I think the way that people will use Zipcar Flex, and we're already starting to see it in the first 2 weeks of service, is people use it for trips that actually public transport wouldn't be great for. So we see them doing side-to-side trips around London. So there isn't this big in and out in the same way at commuter times that there is at the moment. I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever to use Zipcar Flex for commuting. At those times of the day, the roads in London are absolutely packed. Is it going to make most sense to jump in a car and do your commute? It's not. Londoners are not stupid, and we need to give them a bit of credit for actually understanding the best way to do any type of journey. Forgive me for this analogy, people, I've said it a lot, but people often ask me when I go to meetings, did you come here in a Zipcar? No, I didn't, because the best way is going to be by public transport. So I think we've got to give people a bit of credit to figure out the best way to do their journeys.
So it sounds like there's a repeated theme here, which is you have to look at it as a connected system. We're not talking about either or, both and, but looking at the mix, and also trusting that citizens of London have got brains and can figure stuff out for themselves. But that's not in any way to ignore what you've said. But it sounds to me like, as I say, we're in furious agreement.
I always revert to the old TomTom advert here, because what we're talking about is the complexity of our decision making and the contradiction in the research, where people are worried about air quality and congestion, but they think that 76% of the future is, 76% people think the future is still cars. And TomTom had a brilliant campaign that said, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. And then last week, Westminster City Council did a no idling campaign where they're using pester power so they're teaching kids about air quality and pollution, so that it's their children who are going to their parents and saying, please don't idle outside the school, when you're dropping me off, or anything. I told a van user in my road yesterday not to idle, and he was very nice about it. Didn't get killed. But we all have to we have to respect that we're complex people and find routes around that.
And I think this is such a big deal, big question, and a massive problem. I think the Munich example is very good. I also mentioned Melbourne, where they are also taking away parking spaces. And frankly, if you can do it in Melbourne, which has a car culture way beyond London's, you can kind of do it. And, Mad Max was made in Melbourne, just an idea of the car culture. So, and they are also taking away parking spaces. But the way we have to do this means a very different mode of practice as a government. I know you know that, and it's very easy to say and hard to do. So to give an example, Helsinki city government, again, sorry, it's a bloody Nordic city, but still, we keep going back to them. Over the last 18 months, has reorganized its entire city council, gone from 33 departments down to 4, in a collaborative co-design process with citizens to figure out what do we need to make decisions about for the 21st century. Because it turns out we're in the same shape that we were in the 19th century when we were invented. And we've had a kind of a lick of paint throughout the 20th century, but we still have a transport department separate to a health department, separate to a planning department, separate to housing and education and so on. The school run, that one example right there, touches on all of those things simultaneously as a system. And Helsinki have reorganized to enable them to start thinking and acting in that way. So that's the big picture thing that we probably all need to think about carefully. And the small thing is behavior change it's not this case of data and attitude change and then behavior change. Any behavioral psychologists probably tell you, as I think Pat said, make it easy for someone to try something, action. Attitude won't change yet, but as soon as they start trying something different and then they see social proof, as in people like them doing it, it's not people like me, but people like them doing it, then they start doing it, and then their attitude changes sort of third. So it's kind of behavior, then social proof, then attitude change. And often we've oriented ourselves around, we need to change people's attitude. I'll send you an email saying you should really take a bike. That's not really going to work. Absolutely. So I think there's different modes of practice in small ways and big ways, I think.
So, coffee beckons and interesting networking questions. That officially is the end of our time together, but it feels as this is going to run and run. But question though for you, just I thought of it right at the end, which I didn't ask at the beginning. Hands up if you use car sharing, just I'm curious. And hands up if you don't use car sharing, but you're more inclined to use car sharing as a result of today. That's 2 of us. I actually have decided that the whole family, it's 2. But no, actually I decided in the middle of that thing, that's what needs to happen. And that is what's going to happen, provided my wife decides it as well, because she will obviously actually make the decision. But I think today is really about, if we're going to shape the future, we have to unset our mindset. We have to open ourselves up and not necessarily be so right about what we see. And in a weird way, I think you've done that brilliantly, guys.
In a weird way.
Yes, in a weird way. And you've done it in a weird way, in the sense that I'm hoping people come out more, with their minds more open. It's not just you can see the opportunity, but let's grasp this opportunity. Thank you for everyone that's taken part, and let's continue over.